Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Three Body Problem, a podcast that continues to diminish in importance. But why are you laughing?
Sorry,
How,
sorry.
how many listeners do we have this week?
Every time it's
We're up to listener number 30. Juanito, you're the one laughing. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. I appreciate a chronicle of our diminishing importance.
You were at ChinaCon this week in Washington, D.C. I saw some photos floating around Twitter land. What was this CyberCon thing?
ChinaCon was
ChinaCon,
really,
CyberCon.
I mean,
Sorry.
it was really interesting, and I think I wouldn't call it a cyber conference in particular because I think the content that was chosen for it was interestingly diverse. There was like a lot more. Coasting Medians like you had some good talks with IOCs. I'm like, actually, just like one or two, most of them were much more like entity level, persona level, like the kind of stuff that I think is actually quite meaningful in our space, and it's all the more reason why you have a Chatham House conference, small group of people. Let's actually talk about what we understand there.
All focused
So
on China threat and
all
China
focused on
ecosystem.
China, which I find incredibly boring, but some people really like China. So
Are
that's
we going to
cool.
have a RussiaCon in a month and a North KoreaCon 6 months later?
I mean, every conference is
Are
RussiaCon
we
and North
picking on
Korea.
China at this stage?
Well, I think we're picking on China at this stage, but more than anything, it speaks to China's credit and the fact that they're kicking our asses and just they're doing so well that maybe we should focus a little more on China to my detriment. But yes.
Checking in for more Romania studios. Costin Raju, how are you, my friend?
Good. Not invocation this time.
What?
One of the things I forgot to always ask you is to check in on your Taekwondo training. Now that you've a black belt, what happens next?
That's a good question. So next would be the second degree black belt, and you have to wait 1 year for that, continue the training, and learn a few more things. The second degree form. So once you have, let's say, 1 year, exactly this is a period of time required for that, you can test for the second degree black belt.
Good. I kind of framed all of this personal interesting to kick off our show this week with a brand new blog post from Ivan Kwiatkowski. How do you say his last name, Costin?
Ivan Kwiatkowski.
Ivan Kwiatkowski has
or if you want with the French accent, Ivan
I just call him
Kwiatkowski.
Ivan K because I can't pretend to.
Sorry, Ivan. Ivan had a great blog
love
post
Ivan.
called Threat Intel Truths Inside. It starts off by referencing your keynote from LABScon, your keynote of, what do you call it, malcontent?
My malcontent.
With just like a critical reflection on where we are in this industry. It's something we've been talking about consistently on this show. But what his argument is like the endpoint is not as important anymore. Threat intel is not making a significant difference at all. And in fact, threat intel may be missing all the big things that are happening on network devices and mobile and in that world. And he mentioned that he's joining Meta to go work on WhatsApp security. So he's still very much involved in it. But I get a sense, this foreboding kind of, what are we really doing coming out of him? Is that how you read it?
In a way, I read it that way, but it felt very familiar. I actually am really appreciative of Ivan's work. In many ways, he's always been an unsolicited partner in crime in a lot of ways. Like when I worked in Alpha Golang, like the one person who came in and contributed a script was Ivan. When after I did ethics and perils, one person that picked up the conversation in his own research and his own talks was Ivan. And I was actually surprised, I won't say pleasantly, because I really don't want other people to be as unhappy with the space as I am. But I was surprised and sort of pleased to kind of read this and hear things echoed with his own perspective that I think is actually quite valuable, right? Like the fact that he's he's pointing out quite accurately the pigeonholing and failures of this sort of endpoint reliant visibility in all of its limitations, and also to the fact that like market dynamics and sort of the positioning of how companies have worked what we do into their overall strategy, shit doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense. It's self-limiting. It's also promising a thing that is not actually the thing we're trying to do. Like, I don't have a problem with us being the chroniclers of the cyber end times. Somebody should, right? Like, for posterity's sake, for history's sake. And I've tried to point that out for a long time, right? Like, we are essentially um, documenting humankind's incursion into the fifth domain, if that's how you want to call it, if you want to give that militaristic mentality any credence. And that's fine if that's what we're doing, but that's not what we're selling. And that's usually the problem, is you have this sort of mismatched expectations. And for the sake of even bringing myself and my space and maybe even my day job into critical spotlight, um, it's uh, it's also an admission of the limitations and parameters of the endpoint space and its ineffectiveness in the larger ecosystem of this sort of platform defense. Every endpoint provider is trying to pretend that they are the everything security company. And yeah, that starts with us, Sentinel-1, CrowdStrike, Sophos, everybody. Um, and in some cases, you might have a more comprehensive actual product strategy. But even look at Microsoft, right? They're not saying we are the Windows security company. They are the cybersecurity company. And none of that is really patently true, right? Like, security requires a holistic approach to securing a diverse ecosystem that includes appliances and endpoints of all kinds of OSs and cell phones and all these other little things that we rely on, down to the bullshit cameras and the same network and all the cloud instances that you rely on somewhere else. Like that, in many ways, um, we have drawn a tiny box of what our responsibility is, but we're trying to sell it as if we're securing the whole fucking warehouse, right? And of course we're falling short. Of course we are failing to even get anywhere remotely close to what we need to do. So I'm glad that Ivan is calling it out. I don't, the unhappiness, the discontent is still very, very much there, but we should characterize it for what it is.
He's making the argument as a whole, just generalizing here, that threat intel has had limited real world impact, or is now having very, very limited real world impact. Costin, when you look back at your career and, from the creation of Great through now, how would you describe the impact you believe, like, your science and your paleontology has had on society, on computer security, on, like, how do you think history will view this last 10-year period? Is it going to be this passing fad that these guys, did some cool work that got some cool headlines and gave us some visibility? Or is it going to be, you think it's going to be real and meaningful?
Well, first of all, wanted to say that we love Ivan, former colleague of ours, and soon he will start a new job at Meta, which I think is probably very exciting for him, being able to focus more on this kind of, hard to reach and analyze areas that he's talking about in the blog. Now, if you ask me, I absolutely love the kind of things that he's talking about here, especially the part about chronicling, because I've always thought that chronicling is important. Talking about what's going on is important, and for sure, I agree that the impact of documenting and chronicling all this cyber chaos is kind of diminishing and has been diminishing over the last years. Going back maybe to Mandiant's APT1 report was kind of huge, pretty huge. Some of the first reports that we have published, I think they were like, pretty defining in the sense like this is the direction that the industry wants to go. This is kind of research that other companies should be making. This is the kind of, let's say, IOCs or rules or YARA rules or detection strategies that we want to share. This is the kind of cooperation that we want to encourage between researchers and companies. And if you ask me, things have been probably going very, very well until people started commercializing threat intelligence and kind of closing the circles. Instead of sharing information, coveting it and selling it for loads of money to people who basically can't influence the world with it. Like, yeah, maybe it's useful to protect your own company, but for sure it will not change the world. Um, so you may say that maybe the world is no longer changing as fast and as much as it used to due to threat intelligence. But in the end, I like what he says in the blog, kind of the final lines, which is maybe it's not necessarily about changing the world, but it's about finding personal fulfillment. Maybe it's about feeling happy with the kind of things that you are doing and understanding that long term, like maybe in 10, 20, 50 years, these things will still be important
Well,
as
you
we
didn't
are
answer my
kind of.
question though. How do you view your this tenure from the creation to now? Do you feel like history will look back at it favorably and do a checkbox that you significantly kicked the can down the road, or do you feel like this is just we're telling the stories of our own death?
Not necessarily. I think we're telling the stories of how things used to be, and the world nowadays is quite different from what it used to be. I mean, I remember signing back in 2003, I think it was 20 years ago, 21 years ago, this memorandum about the fact that writing malware doesn't teach about malware. Like, there were a lot of discussions about security companies, let's say, kind of crossing the boundaries and writing malware just to, I don't know, prove that my protection is better than yours, or the so-called fighting fire with fire, like this kind of concept that has been pushed for a very long time. And I remember I was having lunch with Nir Barkat, was the mayor of Jerusalem, and he asked, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "Like, we are developing antivirus solutions." He said, "What's that?" Like, it's like a bulletproof vest. It kind of protects you from the terrorists. And he said, like, that's useless. Like, you need to shoot the terrorist because before he has the time to shoot you. This defense is useless. So
One of
kind
the
of
things that
defending forward, if you want.
we'll get to defending forward in a second, and I want to use this to set that up as well. One of the big things, the points he made that resonated with me is that traditional naming and shaming tactics that rarely affect state-sponsored actors and nation-state people because they don't really care. And that's what we kind of thrive on. Signature-based defenses aren't effective. Our industry relies on media exposure. But the larger point he made is advanced actors have largely abandoned traditional desktop environments and are now targeting routers, firewall appliances, Ivanti,
Hmm.
Fortinet, those
Hmm.
guys, the telco networks. And bigger point he made is like the most significant recent discoveries in recent time didn't come from your EDR software or some sort of detection mechanism. It came from incident response post breach. What does that tell us about where we go from here as an industry? Are we just going to continue to be focused on desktop? Is he right? Do we need to rewrite our entire thinking around where threat intelligence goes?
Before that, I think it's very important to say that this is happening because of us. Why have they moved to the network appliances, to mobile phones, and so on? So why are they avoiding the desktop? Is because
So
they
you're
think
you're holding
we've
this
done
up
a
as
good
your
job.
trophy. You've chased them off
Absolutely.
the desktop.
No, I
I
mean, Kostin
think
has a
I
point.
think it's absolutely the case here.
What's that
So
point? Because I disagree completely, but go ahead.
No, I think Kostin has a point. There is so I want to kind of answer this kind of comprehensively. There is definitely an element of the cat and mouse game that caused and reinforced a lot of the evolution of these malware platforms, tactics, TTPs, etc., between the defenders and the threat actors. And I actually, just to make that point a little more nuanced, I think there's a reason. Kostin is right, and you can see it in the fact that that has happened on Windows and has not happened on Linux and Mac. Like that alone, right? It's not an endpoint comprehensive thing, it's a visibility dependent thing. On Windows, where the greatest visibility was and the most effort was put in the cat and mouse game, is where you see the greatest evolution between threat actors. And because there was so much of that back and forth. Whereas when we see Linux malware, you see Mac malware. I think relative to the visibility and the pressure that's been put, you don't see the same evolution, you don't see the same requirements, tactics, etc. And moving beyond that, right? You have a more than a decade of significant burning of operations, almost a decade and a half publicly, largely on Windows, partially on Linux, sort of on Mac. And what do we see from the more advanced threat actors? They move to devices on which the you stand to gain the greatest visibility while having the least opportunity to get caught, the least concern for visibility from, or telemetry collection from the defense side. So IoT devices, Soho routers, edge appliances, uh, and mobile phones. And the sad thing, like, there's a reason why you would hear so much anger and frustration and just general indignation from defenders when it came to the mobile platforms. And you've heard me say this, Ryan, and I've tweeted about it, and I'll get into fights with like Chris Rolfe and other people who are like, "You're asking us to lower the quality and the defense of these mobile platforms." It's like, no, I'm not. I'm asking you to engineer towards having some
Inspectability.
visibility, inspectability. That's all we ever ask for is inspectability, because uh, it is obvious and very readily apparent that threat actors are thriving on that lack of inspectability and getting to do whatever the hell they want. And I think we need to encourage companies to consider inspectability a prime, like, prima facie requirement of privacy preservation. It is not privacy limiting for me to be able to inspect my own device. It is a privacy requirement. It is how I know that you're not lying to me and how I know that somebody else isn't using my device against me. So, what you're seeing from what Ivan is describing is the threat actors have adapted to Kostan's point. They've gone to where we are effectively neutered from the start. We are least likely to be able to catch them. And you can ask Mandiant with with FOMO Typhoon, whatever the fuck you want to call it, on the fact that like they can walk into a place they know is a victim and they may not be able to grab anything anyways. How do you collect from these endpoint appliances? How do you find them in Soho routers? How do you even check an appliance in which the threat actor has more capability of modifying the underlying operating system, firmware, etc., than you do?
How do you answer those though? Answer your questions. Like,
I
where are
think
we going from here? Where is your where does your lab go? If how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this? Is not there. There are no
I'm
answers to that.
I'm
Are
not
you
entirely.
engineering for that future?
I don't think that we are engineering for that future. I'd like to see us engineer for that future. I think there's a reason, like this episode, it might actually bring a lot of ranting together in some interesting ways. We have been bitching infinitely about these appliance vendors for a good reason. We're deeply frustrated. It's like, if you remember when there were these operations that were more, I think it was crimeware, but they were hitting like these NAS devices, these like network storage devices that you would go buy like a Synology thing to be able to hold all your pirated movies or whatever other bullshit it is you're keeping at home. And somebody would hit it with a 0-day and you couldn't fix it or inspect it unless you had a 0-day. That's the kind of situation that we're in right now with these appliances, which is why at first it was like, well, maybe the appliance vendors are going to help. And after a bit, you realize, oh, actually, they have no desire to help. Maybe the government will force them to help. And then after a bit, you're like, oh, no, the government is just patting them on the back for just showing up to the party. Maybe customers will help. Maybe incident response companies will help. And it's like we just keep falling down the rungs of this expectations ladder, and we're literally at, well, maybe I'll hold on to one of the 0-days so that I can also pop this stupid device and try to see what's going on. And I mean, that's just an absolutely ridiculous state of affairs. But again, this is why we keep bitching about regulation and its failures. It's why we keep bitching about appliance vendors and their failures. It's why we keep bitching about the state of incident response tooling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's out of acknowledging that frustration that, like, we can be the best threat hunters on earth, but we cannot, like, you don't just go and like Sylvia Brown, like, hold your hand over the appliance and hope that it answers some fucking questions for you. Like, you need to have some way to inspect it.
Costin.
Yes. Either that or what I've been
I'm
saying
I'm
for so
lost for
long, my
words.
friends. Like, you need to put your money into better solutions like pfSense and Proxmox. Like, if you still, like, I don't know, at this point, if you're still hoping that the appliances will magically open themselves up, or if people will, I don't know,
This
make
is
them
was
more inspectable. Like that's not gonna
it's
happen.
not
Like
going to happen. So you
this is
have to
not
build your
where
own.
the industry is going. Yeah.
That's the thing, guys. Like, I don't know that how much of that is a realistic solution for a big enterprise. Like, and by
That's
that,
my thing. How does that scale at the enterprise level?
well,
Or you're asking me to duct tape and put out some
Mm.
more
yeah, yeah.
duct tape to this
That's what
ball of
I'm
wax?
asking here is like, can I go buy a PF Sense appliance with whatever the insane throughput requirements are of an
And
enterprise?
plug it in.
I went look. I'm listening to you. I went and I just bought a PF Sense, device for my house, and I'm gonna play with all the whatevers. Very excited for that. I don't have to manage an enterprise network and whatever 10 gigabit, whatever whatever the hell the requirements are for in and out, whatever the hell the requirements are for storing this stuff, whatever the hell the usual requirements are for support contracts, right? Like that's the part where you don't get to just be like, fuck it, we're rolling our own. Unless, like, if you're Facebook and you're Google and you have a team of engineers and whatnot, I hope that you are, you should be. But for everybody else below that Fortune 10 threshold, like, is that a viable recommendation? Should we be looking at people and going, no, 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 that's the one appliance vendor you should be buying from? In which case, let's plug them in, right? Like we don't have sponsors, we don't have rules, we don't even fact check. What should these people be buying, right?
Look, can I tell you a story?
Please.
Please.
So back in the days when the war started in Ukraine, this is a story from a friend of mine who actually faced this situation. So they actually had one of these appliances from a very well-known brand, and they pretty much had this everywhere. So they spent, I don't know, you can say easily millions of dollars buying these appliances and deploying them all over their infrastructure. And not only that, but you need to buy the support plan. So with the support plan, you get software updates, you get patches, firmware upgrades. Whenever there's a security issue, you get an update. If you don't have the support plan and there's a 0 day, you don't get a patch, which is hilarious in my opinion. Like you're open. And moreover, let's say, okay, I've decided that I want to come back and restore the support plan. Then you need to pay for all the years during which you were not subscribed.
What?
It's completely absurd. But anyway, this is a game. So this is what you get for paying millions of dollars. So, like I said, the war starts in Ukraine, and these people, they get an email saying you need to declare who is, let's say, the official party receiving our services through this hardware appliance in your offices. So who is it? Like, where is this company located? And obviously, from their point of view, it's very difficult to say exactly where the headquarters is located, like, or due to the legal setup of entities, who actually owns this entity and like who they depend on. So they don't reply. So what happens is that in a couple of weeks, inside the appliance, in the web interface, the firmware update button disappears, like magically disappears. It's not there anymore. Like even if you have the binary firmware, you can't upload it anymore because the button's gone. The ironic thing is that it's gone from the main interface, but if you dig further deeper into the interface, you find like another page which still has the button, so you can still update it, but not from the main page. Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing is that their subscription plan, which was paid in advance, is gone. Like,
Oh my
it's a
goodness.
reset. You are no longer subscribed. Like, it was remotely turned off. The button was remotely turned off. The subscription was remotely turned off. They asked for the money back. No way, because it's force majeure. So you won't get the money back. So at this
Wow.
point, I think they realize that these kind of solutions are not sustainable in today's world. Like this doesn't work anymore. Like where you pay the money in advance and then there's like all this tomfoolery with the buttons disappearing. You can't do firmware upgrades. There's a 0 day, but if you don't pay us, you don't get the patches. Like so they switch to PF Sense and they, I don't know, live happily ever after. I'm just saying that if you're asking like where to invest your efforts and where to invest your money, I think the current models, which are not inspectable, tied to all these stupid licensing agreements, where you need to declare where your headquarters are, and even like more funny was that the reasoning for turning off their licensing was that your company's headquarters is not in a NATO country. So that was the explanation. Your headquarters are not in a NATO country.
I hate that
S-
you're not telling us who this is, because
Ah,
this is like one of those fuck Okta moments where you're like, look, let's just call it what it is, you know. Which, by the way, sorry, this is a complete non sequitur, but we didn't even add the bullshit Okta story to this episode, and I think let's just put a pin on that one for later.
we'll do
We
that.
have been complaining for the last couple of episodes about the absence of inspectability. One company that decided, I want to do something about it was Sophos.
What a great way to introduce. Thank you.
So we have the big story. The big story of the week, obviously, is Sophos' Pacific Rim report, which provides a timeline of this 5-year cat and mouse battle between Chinese nation-state groups that they have with high confidence with Chinese nation-state groups compromising their firewall appliances. The same story we've been talking about forever, but in this specific story, it's really fascinating back and forth on how the Chinese are playing this long game and with these nation-state attackers going back and forth. But then we get to the part of the story that really sticks out and made headlines was while conducting a post-mortem review of one of the attacks during this 5-year thing, the Sophos XOps team built a specialized kernel implant to deploy to devices that Sophos had high confidence were controlled by these groups conducting malicious exploit research. The tool allowed for remote file and log collection without any visible user and artifacts. I just want to focus on that little sentence there. There's a lot of headlines about hacking back, defend forward. Is it fair, Juanito, to call this inspectability?
Absolutely.
You celebrate this?
Yes, with a qualified thing. I hate it. I hate having to say that because I know that like the Twitter trolls are already like out of our 30 listeners, there's at least one Twitter troll who has completely like boxed me in as
Mr. America.
Mr. America, and
But not
apparently
only that, you have long argued that you've long argued that these legal frameworks block us from really going that extra mile that we need to go that extra mile
Well-
to do what we have to do. Paint the picture here of what happened first, and let's put it into context for the listeners.
So okay, let me try to characterize the argument the way that I'm hearing it, and then let's talk about what happened, because I think those are two different things. And in that, like I'm a little indignant with how we're treating the conversation, even on Twitter, even the people in this podcast. So I love you guys. I'm not actually complaining.
Not
You
complain.
no, and Ryan too. No. Okay. So as far as we understand it, right? Sophos has been at this for about 4 to 5 years, and I had heard some private versions of the Pacific Rim report, like even at PivotCon and some of these other close places. So they were sharing some of the information about the threat actor and what they were seeing. We just didn't understand the context. When you read this report and now the Wired article and whatnot, I think what seems to be standing out the most to the threat intel industry is that as Sophos is not only an endpoint vendor, but they also have appliances like the ones that we've been discussing. And what Sophos starts to notice is that they're getting hit with 0 days for these appliances. And something that very commonly happens at security vendors is when you realize that somebody has deployed an O-day, one of the first things you do is go in our telemetry, where did we see somebody fucking with our product over and over and over and over and over and over and over again in the way that you have to when you're testing a 0 day. And every security vendor, I don't give a fuck what you say, has done this. Because why wouldn't you? Especially if it's a proprietary product that requires a contract and a full, when you have only enterprise deployments, you go, I'm sorry, is someone who has bought our product breaking our EULA by by reverse engineering it, testing 0 days and so on? To speak
And usually
to that,
traces back to trial licenses and so on. That's what you're talking about, right? Like
well,
tracing
sometimes it'll say go back to trial licenses. Sometimes it'll go back to legitimate customers who have like over excited red teamers in their employ, which is that's all fine, that's all manageable. But sometimes it'll lead back to an organization that may have bought your product through a reseller. They may have bought it under false pretenses. They may have bought a resold product, especially when it comes to appliances, right? You can't control the fact that somebody might grab that appliance and resell it on eBay, et cetera, et cetera. And then but to that effect, that's a little easier to stomach on the endpoint world because it's part of the normal telemetry. Let's say that Watson grabs for Microsoft, right? Like when they're looking at ODAs, you usually have a series of crashes that they bucket together. We've had this explained by John Lambert. We've had it explained by Bruce Dang before, right? When you want to go look for ODAs, you want to look for vulnerability development, you go, okay, where are all the Watson crashes? What were the earliest Watson crashes for this thing? And the same way that I'm out here already spilling secrets, right? The same way that the first people to resolve a domain, the first people to ever have a hash, the first people to have ever seen these crashes, they're going to be more interesting than the last ones, right? So what ends up, long story short, what ends up happening with Sophos is they start to look at who is having these sort of bizarre interactions with their appliances, and they round up on a Chinese university research center. And I think it proves out that that type of hunting sort of proves itself out because that is the beginning from the timeline they're providing of a 5-year race of constant back and forth development of 0 days being traced back to the same place or similar places, and this sort of back and forth, not just one O-Day, but another O-Day and another O-Day, and an attempt to turn off telemetry collection, and an attempt to turn off hot fixes, and an attempt to turn off patching. So there is very much a back and forth going on between them. Where it gets interesting is where they, in their own words, develop a kernel implant that they deploy to this device in order to collect more information about the development of what's happening in there. And that's where I see us splitting as an audience and going, I mean, what the fuck, right? Like, developer pushing
What's a
malware.
kernel implant? When you read that, what is a kernel implant in your
Well,
mind?
so I say that it's really interesting that they call it a kernel implant because if I worked at Sophos, I would have called it a telemetry enhancing update. I would have called it a firmware patch, an emergency firmware patch for
But why is it that? Because you feel that it is dangerous to call it a kernel implant? Does it suggest there's something illegal going on? Like, why would you
no,
call it
no.
telemetry gathering?
I think they painted a target on their backs that they didn't need to because when any of us in the endpoint space push out an anti-tampering patch that collects telemetry in a way that we hadn't considered before.
We don't view that as a
We don't
controversial
view that
piece.
as anything controversial. We just fix the product to see more stuff and to keep it from being abused. So, and that's why I'm looking at you guys being like, come on, like what?
Well, wait, let me get Costin to explain to the audience why you're completely full of shit. Costin, in all seriousness, when you read kernel implant, and I didn't read the next line in the report. The next line, the next part of the timeline said, after consulting with legal counsel, so they knew that there was some sort of problematic area here. After consulting with legal, we deployed the targeted implant and observed the attacker using Vim to write and run a Perl script. While of low value, the deployment served as like valuable demonstration of this intel collection. Then they deployed the targeted implant to a cluster of devices associated with this Chengdu or university that Juan mentioned, located in Sichuan. So they obviously knew it was problematic. They made the deliberate decision to call it a firmware implant. For the most part, people here in the West are applauding them like Juan did. Costin, why in your mind this is very, very problematic and kind of like a really crossing of a gray area?
Well, I can think of a couple of reasons. So, just like for the sake of time, I think I'll
We got
maybe
time. We
two.
got time
I'll
because I
mention
really
two.
want to dig into this in a way where we're really examining the nuance of all of it.
Ryan's giving us our first 2-hour episode, man.
Let's go.
Go to
It's
town.
happening. It's happening.
It's happening.
What are we? 35 minutes on. So the first one, maybe I would say is more relevant for me because I've been in this business for a very long time, 30 years now. And I remember that the very early beginnings, whenever we were doing a press conference, my boss used to have a folded paper in his back pocket with the word no. And it was like every single time I remember every single time we did a press conference with journalists, somebody would stand up and say, is it true that antivirus companies are also writing these viruses so then they can sell us their solutions for the viruses they write? So then Eugene would take out this paper and just, no, we are not. We are not the ones writing the viruses because we don't have to. We don't need to write viruses. There's like millions of
Thousands and
viruses out
millions,
there.
yeah.
So we don't actually have to do this because there's like too many out there. Now, I think for the first time in history, we see this reversed. We see public admission that antivirus companies do write viruses. One, two.
Wait a second. So you're calling it a virus?
No.
They
Wait,
write
let him
malware.
finish
They
because
write
I
malware.
want to. Why do you call
I'm
it a
not.
piece of
They're
malware?
calling it implants, right? It is implants, correct? This is like, of course, the attempt to whitewash malware. It's not actually malware; it's implants, right? We are not actually infecting anyone. We are doing CNE. That's just CNE, man. We're not infecting you. We were just CNEing you. Which is not even CNA. It's just CNE. It's like not that dangerous. I mean, what are you like so worried about? Yeah. So yeah, for the first time in history, there's like public admission that antivirus companies develop malware. Okay, one, two. They deploy it to their customers as an update or through other means. I'm not entirely sure how. And three, using it to spy on their customers. So I think like the whole story that antivirus companies don't write malware is kind of over. So we can abandon that. I think this is the first, I would say, a bad thing in this story. Maybe
Wait.
the second
Should we pick them apart individually? Because
Yeah,
Juan, you're shaking your head violently that
Let
this
me
is not
finish.
malware.
Let me
we
finish.
have-
Like,
Okay, he
Can I
wants to
finish?
finish. Yes, go.
Can I finish? All right. So the second one here is, and I think this is a part of the text which is really important. It says we're going to deploy this implant, not malware, let's call it an implant. We're going to deploy it to devices or machines or whatever where we have high confidence. That's not very high confidence or like ultimate confidence. It's
Just
high
high.
confidence. High confidence.
TLP red and a half confidence.
That they are controlled by groups conducting malicious exploit research. So, like, to me, this opens up a lot of questions. One, how high is the confidence? Like, what is the likeness that if you do some exploit research, you actually get this implant on your machine? Maybe you're doing some, I don't know, you have a lot of friends doing vulnerability research. Are they all getting the implant like from their EDR? I mean, if this is, let's say, the new normal. Two, how many? I mean, is it like everyone? Is it hundreds? Is it thousands of people getting the implant? Is it like millions? I don't know. Is it just people in China? I mean, if it's just in China, maybe something, it's just China, man. But maybe it's not just China. Maybe it's like, I don't know, Eastern Europe, because those Eastern Europe motherfuckers, they're like doing exploit research. Everybody knows all the bad things. They come from Eastern Europe. We were watching like The Conjuring yesterday. And like the devil came from Romania. Like everybody knows those Romanians motherfuckers, they are evil, right? So is it like Romanians get it as well, or is it like just China? It's a question. I don't know. It's interesting. I'm not accusing anyone. Just to be clear, I'm just asking questions.
You don't
But
actually.
he's asking a lot of he's asking a lot of very, very relevant questions. Like to be just dismissive that we can call this a hot patch so we can do telemetry collection is kind of disingenuous.
I'm not being I think I'm not being dismissive because I want to have the full conversation, but I actually think the terms of our discussion are disingenuous by virtue of reflecting uh, the nature of how this conversation has played out in the antivirus space over the past 20 years on terms that are kind of stupid. And that's not an insult to anyone here, but I mean in the sense that, like, the conversation around, let's say, antivirus companies writing malware, that conversation came about in the like late 90s, early 2000s because of folks like Rob Rosenberg who espoused the conspiracy theory that viruses didn't naturally exist, and antivirus companies were writing they were creating the disease for which they were selling the cure. And that is a notion that we now consider patently false and ridiculous because there's an abundance of malware. There is a lot of known, established, arrested, well documented virus writers, and a lot of motivations that are really clear and obvious to us in this day and age. But this is the same industry that in 2009 didn't believe cyber espionage occurred. And in 2013, I remember Caro Workshop watching a talk where somebody suggested that a desktop malware infection could possibly um, infect a mobile phone that was connected to the computer, and people laughed like it was some kind of science fiction bullshit when we saw that Hacking Team and a bunch of other places had already been doing that shit. So it has never been an industry characterized by phenomenal self-awareness or fantastic foresight.
The
It
old
is,
AV guys never really made the move. There was a handful of them that did, but there's a that
yeah,
old, like Costin early in the podcast you mentioned that 2000 was it 2003 letter?
3. Hmm.
Yeah, where hundreds of these real old school antivirus creators and pioneers basically, hey, we pledge we will never create viruses for the purpose of learning. Costin bring this up because that's what we're doing
yeah,
here.
yeah. But I think those are the old terms of that conversation, which were responding to how society and how the environment viewed the antivirus industry at a time when they weren't even familiar with the virus, ecosystem and what the value of computers was really going to ultimately be, and so on and so forth. So I just don't. I think it's a we can accept those terms in that time, but it is not exactly right for what we do now. And I'll also say, like, more to that point, you have plenty of defensive researchers writing malware for all kinds of stupid reasons, or like red teamers who are like putting this shit out. They just want to do it because it's cool, and it's like, okay, fine. But that really that we're using sort of an outdated discussion to evaluate the ethics and sort of moral imperatives of what we're seeing now.
So
And
modernize it for us.
well, I think in some ways we already have, and I would just resurrect the ethics and moral imperatives of appliance vendors who are not providing any kind of inspectability, responsibility, and so on for what is happening on their appliances, not just as far as 0 days go, but who is living on those appliances. We've mentioned the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war, as far as Mandiant has reported, was largely fueled and powered by appliance infections that we were in no position to handle, which then provided access to a great deal of networks that were indefensible at a time of war. What are the ethical imperatives of those appliance vendors that have done jack shit to help in that situation? That's one. Two, look at the situation Kostin just described, right? He actually mentioned it from a Ukrainian organization, if I remember correctly. They literally took your money, were unwilling to provide you with patches, were willing to price gouge you about the patches of the past years you hadn't paid for, and then still didn't give you the ability to defend, inspect, monitor your own device. Go fuck yourself. What are the ethics and whatever there? So, like, the reason I am really put off by us coming down on Sophos is that they're the first appliance vendor that, for some fucking reason, wasn't already providing the right kind of telemetry collection capabilities on their appliances. But let's not judge them for that and just celebrate them for coming into the fucking party at all, because everybody else has sat it out and saying, okay, who the fuck is doing this? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it? Where are they going? What are they using this for? Let's go. What did they get out of it? A bunch of 0 days, a bunch of implants that we hadn't otherwise seen, a threat actor description that had not been discussed before, which also, like, look at the targets, right? It's not just, the ones we already know about, but also sort of Tibetans and other organizations in like important countries, nuclear administrations, et cetera, like important shit. Also, I don't know where to take this because they're using the old name Winty, but discussions about how some of these personalities, like this T Stark person, whom I'm going to assume must be in their 40s or 50s because they're fucking writing Perl and Vim. Anyways, who apparently may be related to Winty, who apparently is helping to fuel these orb network creations, which right now, I'll point to Chinacom, but I'll point to all of our other discussions before that. The Chinese are kicking our asses. FOMO Typhoon is here for a reason. We are getting fucked. And if you want predictions for next year for the journalists that are listening, we're going to continue to get absolutely obliterated by the Chinese for the next few years, largely on the backs of appliance vendors.
And
So
this is the thinking that frees us up to say we can write implants and do telemetry collection via implants. And I really want to get to the crux of it because you guys talked about the war. Guys talked about Ukraine, the start of the war, the connections between these things, the typhoons is like pre-war positioning. If this is military activity, do private sector companies and individual researchers want to get into admitting to hacking back? And should we even call it hacking back? Like no, and I bring it up because we've had Mauro at LabsCon 1 basically saying, guys, be careful about being caught up in being unwitting combatants in this world. These ministries of defenses do not discriminate between who is doing their hacking. And be careful, and it's a very, very murky world that we are playing in, and we're very, we're getting obliterated. So let's push the envelope. Like
I appreciate that you bring that up, right? So in a variety of ways, right? First of all, Mauro.
First of all, who's Mauro for the audience?
Mauro Vignati, who is now at the Committee for the Red Cross,
International Red Cross, correct?
Yeah, he's been putting out some really interesting work on that front. I don't necessarily. It's not that I don't agree with it.
You don't see a connection with this at all?
No. I'm not saying that I don't see a connection. I'm saying that I personally have a much stronger stomach for it than I think a lot of people in the industry do. But I'm also the kind of person who thinks that a lot of these companies, God, this is gonna sound so like Mr. America. Fuck, you guys.
Go.
I resent
Get your flag. Where's your flag?
Yeah, where's my eagles and all this shit? No, I personally resent the IDGAF approach that a lot of these American companies, quote unquote, have shown when it comes to our defense, but really Western defense in general, right? Like when it's inconvenient, we're global companies and we treat everybody the same. When it's convenient, we're American companies and God, please help protect us and whatnot. And that kind of bullshit upsets me in general. But I will also say that I do think that this is very much like America pre-joining in World War II. Like we have this sort of isolationist, like not our problem mentality until the day we get hit in the face. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, really, we should be doing something about this. Look, going back to the way the conversation has been framed, I think there are two really meaningful differences here, which is why I'm getting hung up on the like, I don't care, they shouldn't have called it a kernel implant, but even if they did, whatever kind of mentality. We are, and Kosin, like, really, like, I think we're really applying the EDR antivirus slash endpoint security mentality to an appliance, which I really think is a meaningful distinction. You are bringing your device, we are putting our software on it, and it's very different what happens when we decide to add functionality unbeknownst to you without your consent. In an appliance, that is not the case at all.
Whose
It-
appliance is it? Is it the
Well-
customers or is it Sophos's?
That's a great fucking question. But in theory, let's say that it is the customers. But at the end of the day, it's not a device that's holding PII. It is not a device that is you brought it to spec, we put something on it, and we can only put X amount of something on it. I'll bet you that fucking EULA actually includes their ability to do a lot of this. It probably also includes the ability to do remote management on it. Because otherwise, how the hell do you ever maintain an appliance?
Costin,
So,
did
like-
I read accurately that the implant was also doing, or the telemetry collection was also doing screenshots and keystroke recordings? And like, explain that to me. I thought that was only in the desktop world.
Well, what we see here, they specifically say they observed the attacker using Vim. So that's a text editor to write and run a simple Perl script.
I'm telling you, that guy has to be 40 at least.
That has to be what, 40?
The guy has to be
40-year-old guy.
40 years old.
Shout-
Like Vim
Shout
and
out
Perl.
to our good friend Mr. Kurt Baumgartner. By the way, it was his birthday. It was his birthday yesterday.
Oh.
Happy birthday, buddy.
Happy birthday, Kurt.
51 Springs.
Jeez.
I think he's a fan of Perl. So yeah, observing the attacker using Vim to write and run a Perl script. I think that's a pretty cool capability, if you ask me. It probably indicates that they had the ability to see real time, which is what they're saying, of the attackers writing this script in Vim. So that is capturing the keystrokes. I don't know about screenshotting. I don't know if that.
Well, they don't need
has-
screenshotting. If it's SSH, right? It's no
Correct.
GUI.
Just simply knowing what is being typed in the terminal should be pretty good in this context.
Costin, do you see a connection with Mauro's warnings and Mauro's kind of cautioning of the
look,
industry?
We did this poll on Twitter, on X, if you want, and I think it's nice to mention the results. We asked everyone if they're okay with your EDR vendor building a specialized kernel implant to silently deploy to devices they have high confidence, are controlled by groups conducting malicious exploit research, allowing them to do remote file and log collection without any
That was the
visible.
question. The
That was
question
the
is if you're okay with your EDR vendor doing what Sophos did.
The answer was 34% yes, and 65.9% said no. So
I voted so many times just to
you
try to
voted
get
so
that.
many times, right? You voted no. I appreciate. I do see what Juan is saying, which is important, that appliances are not the same as endpoints, right? So maybe the question was a bit tricky. We can probably rerun it with appliances, but again, the question is: would you actually be happy having such an appliance where the vendors can, like any very moment, can deploy new code, spy on what you're doing in Vim, spy on your Perl scripts?
Let's
I
be
don't know.
clear that they all can. Let's be
I don't think I
clear.
agree that they all can. I
They
don't think
can.
all.
They
All can.
don't, but they all can. Anyone who has remote SSH capability into whatever device they sold you can do this. They may not choose to. They may have never chosen to, the way
Mhm.
some AVs have never chosen to change all of their customers to a different AV, but they can.
I agree, but
They
I
always
would
could.
never buy a device in which the vendor has SSH access. I think
But that's
if
an
you do
enterprise
that,
requirement. That's an
that's
enterprise support requirement, right?
over.
If I sell you a device and you take it to Transylvania, and I have to still be able to fix it whenever someone in your employ decides to go and delete, a critical file because they're idiots, I need to be able to remote into it, or you're gonna have to ship me that fucking device. So, like, I will promise you that every one of those fucking devices has some kind of SSH private public key pair or some other way in which you can remote into it.
And again, which opens whole new door of possibilities of that company getting breached, SSH
It's a
keys
backdoor,
getting
right?
stolen. It's essentially like it's a backdoor in your infrastructure. If you're willing to live
Absolutely.
with that risk, that's fine, I think.
But you are.
Isn't
Like,
it the
that's the
same?
part I want to admit. You are. We have to tell it like it is. You are living with that risk for pretty much every vendor of everything you are currently using on some greater or lesser level. Let's just call it the way it is.
I have
Um,
I
yeah,
have so
again, it
many
depends.
questions
It
like
depends.
flying around.
Not on small appliances, not on PFSense, and again, I think that typically this comes with the bigger things. And remember, there was like a huge discussion around Huawei appliances having exactly this kind of problem you're talking about, and Chinese engineers logging in into these devices remotely to allegedly fix them or patch them or repair
Right.
them.
Because they can. I'm not, I'm just saying, like, it's there, it's been there. What we are discussing right now is our comfort with how that capability is used. And I do want to point to that because one of the, so I said that there's two ways in which we're kind of disingenuously discussing this thing. One of them is what we already talked about with, like, equating it to EDR on your endpoint. You bring the device, you stack the software, you do the thing, and then you install our product, somebody's product on it, and they do things on your stuff that you don't like. Versus an appliance, and it's literally filled with whatever the hell the person selling it to you put in there. You don't even know what's in there. Half the time you can't even check what's in there, and they put in and remove and add and change whatever you want. That's one of the terms. The other one that I think is important is, I will bet you whatever you want that Sophos checked with their legal team, not be not because they were not because of the nature of the thing they were deploying, but because it was being selectively deployed to a single subset of customers, quote unquote, and not to the entire fleet. Because at that point, what you're checking is, what is our coverage in the EULA for this situation? In the end user licensing agreement, can I actually treat one customer or a subset of customers differently, legitimately, in what I push to them, as opposed to all customers? Because that's the only distinction that we're drawing here. And I think it's important that we do draw it. To what extent can I treat one shady site differently than the whole fleet? To what extent do the activities that are taking place at this place violate our end user licensing agreement to a point where I can treat this as a rogue deployment, as something that is already out of the coverage of the privacy protections of the EULA in the first place? And that is a meaningful distinction, and it's one that I've tried to draw before with cloud providers too. Because we talk a lot about, like, privacy, and I think this is Apple's fault to start, but everybody has leaned into it way too well. Privacy is very often used as an excuse for why vendors are not protecting customers. And in many cases, we forget that those privacy protections are largely what is spelled out in an end user licensing agreement. And that end user licensing agreement not only changes whenever the fuck they want, but it's not beyond the pale to put in terms where it says, if this device is being used for X, Y, and Z, if we have indications that this device is, or that this, let's say, cloud VPS server is being used to conduct malicious activity, then it no longer is protected by these privacy measures detailed in section 4.5AB. That's all the cloud providers have ever had to do to legitimately be able to inspect this shit. Anyways, that's a separate conversation. But in this appliance sense, it's like, I'm pretty sure that would have been the only part of this that Sophos needed to check with their lawyers. This is not a hackback situation.
You're okay with Ivanti having a threat intel group doing this, and Barracuda having a threat intel doing this, and Fortinet, like everyone, you're comfortable with this becoming the norm?
I'm pissed that they don't already. I think
Okay.
that's one of the ways in which they are failing all of us. But though Fortinet does have a threat intel team, and we are hearing signs of life from them, but
What do
it's
signs of life mean? Deploying implants? No, that's what I'm asking about. Your comfort
no.
level with every threat intel team having this ability to use this capability because it's for the greater
Well,
good in your argument.
again, let's really narrow down what we mean. When you say
Man, I
deploying
ask
im
you a question. Are you
yeah,
comfortable with
I am
14? Are
com
you comfortable with this becoming the norm?
I am comfortable with this becoming the norm when what you're describing is I have found the testing site that is being used to develop the exploits that are weakening the protection of my entire fleet of devices. It is not a legitimate use of this device. It is not a privacy protected use of this device. It is almost certainly not a legitimately sold version of this device. And by doing this, I can protect all of my customers proactively to a series of vulnerabilities that I'm otherwise not going to become aware of unless I get lucky somewhere. Fuck yeah, I'm okay with this. It's ridiculous.
Costin, are there frameworks that you guys use to determine high confidence, low confidence, medium confidence? Because I feel like if this becomes the norm, like Juan is arguing, and we establish, okay, this is the way the world is going to work moving forward, then the idea of confidence levels becomes important. I guess that's how it's born out of the intelligence world, right? This confidence
Yeah.
level thing. Are there frameworks? Is there like a set thing that we all establish, or everyone just makes up this fucking confidence word based on how badly they want to publish something?
Let's be clear, the confidence levels of are a thing determined literally by the intelligence apparatus of many different countries in a public way. How well we apply those is up to us. Just to add that.
Because Costin, you've used confidence, you've used this language in your public reporting. How do you get to this? Is there a framework? Is it an established
There are
framework that Juan will use at Sentinel-1 and someone else will use at Sophos?
there are actually quite a few frameworks, and in particular there are a couple of CIA intelligence manuals that define these confidence levels. So shout out to our friend Serge, who actually introduced me to these frameworks for the first time. What I can tell you is that in my experience, so there's like one thing is the theory, another thing is the experience. In the experience, okay, let's determine the confidence that this is that. And we say, like, based on my feeling, this is like about
Exactly.
45%. Based on like how the wind is blowing, this is about 50, in my opinion. We were like, yeah, it feels like 50. Let's
That's my
agree on
point.
50.
My point is that the frameworks we're comfortable with?
I mean, that's not how it's supposed to work, but it is how it
But we know that's how it works, right?
That's
But
why I
look,
said in practice. In theory, yes, but in practice, it's like, yeah, it looks like about 50.
well, it's what we're being told about in this case because what they said was we're pretty confident that this is them. They didn't sit there and go, well, having seen that, we don't want to describe all the telemetry we normally collect from these places. And looking at that telemetry that we don't want to talk about, it turns out that this fucking device, the only thing it's being used for is as a farm to test exploits. I don't
And it's
want to
fair game. In
discuss
your mind,
that
it's
with
fair
you.
game.
Instead, I'm going to tell you with high confidence that this device is almost certainly, most likely, out of all possible uses, only being used for this nefarious bullshit, right? Like it's a shorthand. It's not an actual analytic rigor thing. They're just not going into that. Now, let me describe a counterfactual, or actually like just a slightly adjacent scenario, which is why I'm getting so hung up on the language. If Sophos had a system, let's call it Watson, in which every time an appliance crashes or has an error, they collect all of the logs and all of the, scripts and anything that led to that crash and siphon it off to a server for quality assurance. And instead of having to deploy a quote unquote kernel implant, they just sat in their own little database of quality assurance and said, wow, there's one device with an anonymized GUID somewhere whose name we don't know, where it lives. that keeps crashing over and over and over and over and over and over again until the development of this weird technique that turns out to be a vulnerability we had never heard of. And then boom, it shows up somewhere else, we wouldn't be having this fucking conversation at all. So in a way, what we're seeing is
They retroactively did this though, because the fascinating part of the story is they ended up paying these attackers $20,000. Did you realize this? So that's the
love that.
craziest part of
Well, you know, I'm also wondering if they said it because they're like, "Hey, did you guys get legal?
Yeah.
Like, did you guys get like the government to say it's okay to get paid by us? Because we're
I
cool
feel
with
like
you
that was
getting thrown in jail." too."
total snitching.
Yeah,
Total
they
like
were like, "Let's see if this is okay with your overlords, man."
and I bring that up because the $20,000 that Sophos paid to these Chinese hackers came in the form of a bug bounty because the hackers had reported one of these CVEs to Sophos as through their regular reporting system, collected a bounty, and as part of this kind of retroactive incident response, look back, telemetry collection, mining their databases, they found out that this stuff was coming from Chengdu, likely at the same university, and this bug had already been exploited multiple times in the past before they had reported it and got this bounty. So it's like they have this capability, they did it retroactively. Costin, I want to put a bow on this story because we're an hour and 5 minutes in and we haven't established anything. We established, according to Juan, that this is a good thing and more people should be doing it, and maybe more people are doing it and calling it something else.
I don't.
Costin, what?
They should be doing it. It's why
you just said.
No, it's just it's a nice patch in a bad situation. Why the fuck weren't your appliances doing this shit 5 fucking years ago? Why isn't this part of your firmware? Why isn't it part of your support cycle? Like, what the fuck is happening?
And why is nobody asking that? Why is Sophos's software riddled with 0 days? That these guys are popping? Did they sign the pledge?
They're trying to fix it. I'll give them that. You need to praise Sophos for what they did. They are the only motherfuckers in this appliance space that went 10 miles ahead. Well, I don't know. Maybe Palo Alto's done it too. They've just been very quiet.
How do you know they're the only ones?
Yeah, maybe not. I'll say this. Cisco, Palo Alto, and Sophos seem to be trying to patch their shit and figure out what's going on as quickly as possible, and their threat intel teams are on top of it. And then on the other side, you have Ivanti, Barracuda, I don't think Ivanti and PulseSecure are the same shit, like Fortinet, whatever, that are just trying to duck and weave and like just hope that nobody that people just forget they're there by hiding the problem. And that's my issue here. Like, I don't want to paint a negative light on a company showing a conscience and trying to do whatever they need to do to fix a bad situation when you have 3-4 other companies that don't give a fuck and they're just trying to manage this as a PR problem.
A little bit of whataboutism there, though. A little tiny bit. Paul Chichester from the NCSC said, "We commend Sophos' transparency in sharing this report and encourage the cybersecurity community to take advantage of its insights and improve security outcomes." Costin, do you understand what that sentence means?
The way I read it, I think it would be amazing if Paul could actually come on the podcast as he promised to me that he would, and actually detail what he means by that. But my understanding is we encourage the cyber community to take advantage of its insights. What this means, you need to build better telemetry. You need to build more implants in your firmware by default.
Implants.
So Chich calling for implants is your headline.
To improve security outcomes. That means that the current outcomes are not so good, which yes, Ivanti and so on. So you need to improve that, like catch the 0 days and patch them. So the way I see it, he is saying like you need to improve telemetry, catch more 0 days, patch them. So we must ensure security is embedded in the technologies we use. Embed telemetry by default, like total information awareness telemetry from design through to deployment. So it needs to be built in and enabled by default. That's my understanding, to prevent threat actors compromising networks. So that's how I read it. But I just want to say two very
Wrap up
important
this story
things.
quickly.
To wrap up the story, one story and maybe one conclusion. First story.
And leave with a question question.
Friend of mine, very good friend of mine, which has been doing this kind of things for decades, if you want. And
When you say
we
these
are aware, we have to admit that this kind of hackback things have been happening for decades. APT1, you know what I'm talking about. People listening to us know what I'm talking about. No need to give details. So,
Russia,
friend
if
of
you're
mine,
listening.
doing this kind of things for decades, meeting with the FBI and asking, hey, is it okay if I am pawning the Chinese guys doing exploits, APT development, and CNCing and stealing information from American companies? And the FBI is saying, you better not do that, motherfucker, because we're going to come for you first, not for the Chinese. We're going to come for you. This is what the FBI said. That's number one.
Then they said, please share any information you have gotten so far.
Stop picking on my Federal Bureau of Investigation.
You better share.
You better share the shit
all
you
that
stole,
information, motherfucker.
but stop it.
Before you get to number two, do we believe Rob Joyce had a clue that this report was coming when he was on
number two?
I mean,
go. Finish number two.
Number two. Couple of days ago, I think actually one day before the report hits the news, Rob Joyce, former head of TAO, Tailored Access Operations at the NSA, is actually arguing with the JD about hackback and saying, like, you better not hack back and put us in a big misery because the Chinese will come and they'll start complaining, and we are already trying to negotiate all that.
It's not the Chinese though. He was talking about friendlies. He was talking about friendlies getting caught up in it and friendlies, and he's saying the conversations on the back end of taking those conversations are very, very problematic. Juan, you're rolling your eyes.
Who gives a fuck
about Rob Joyce?
Cares? No. I love Rob Joyce. I consider him a friend, and
it's easy for you to say that. There's diplomacy that has to happen.
Yeah, and it's
especially with friends.
It's not my fucking job. I don't care if they have some difficult conversations ahead of them. There's a reason there's a government, there's a private sector, there's academia, there's Silas as a superpower somewhere. Like, you just...
But hackback should be the work of law enforcement. It shouldn't be in the hands of everyone. I think that's the thing I can't get around.
First of all, I'm gonna go about this the way I usually do. Let's disambiguate the language. Hackback is a stupid fucking concept. It's been a stupid fucking concept all along.
There's your clip. Hold on. Let me mark the time. 1:12. Go ahead.
It's a stupid fucking concept in the first place because we're not talking about, like, there is no value to hacking back. It makes no sense. It has never made sense. The idea that the victim is entitled to hack this person that hacked them to do what? To grab stuff back? Like, the physics are wrong. It doesn't make any sense. So really, I don't even know what we're talking about when we talk about hack back. So if you're talking about what
planting an implant, putting an implant.
On the perspective.
No. When you
but
talk about hack,
in this story, it's important. Sorry, just to interrupt. Just to mention the fact that I think it's in the story that Sophos started looking into this after one of their branches got popped.
Yeah.
So it depends on the perspective.
It depends on the perspective. I would also argue, like, what is being hacked in this at all, like on the return side of things, but. The reason I want to shift away from the Sophos thing to talk more purely about the JD Rob Joyce thing, if that's what
breaking into a C2 to pick up your documents that were stolen and put there. Is that hackback? I just don't understand. You dismiss the term hackback
because the term hackback is fucking dumb. Because it's a DC version of this mentality of, like, if you break into my house, I'm gonna shoot you, and that's okay. If I shoot you on the street, then I'm just a murderer. But if I shoot you in my living room, I'm defending my home, right? It's like castle law type shit. And, like, we keep having to translate concepts in cyber for these fucking septuagenarians who don't understand what computers are like. And then we turn them into these metaphors that aren't quite accurately representative of the problem, but that are a little more understandable to, like, the fucking 70-year-old urologist who is in charge of, like, the law when it comes to these things.
What would you call it? What's a better phrasing?
It's just that I don't even understand the scenario we're describing with hackback, because usually the person you're having that conversation with is, let's say, a bank or some company here, a manufacturing company in the US who got hacked and by some ransomware operator, and they think that the thing that somebody took from me is something that I can get back. And those physics don't work that way in cyber because data is infinitely replicable. There is no unique tangibility to the thing that was stolen from me. If you go on that C2 and you find your documents, you're not getting them back. You may grab a copy, you may delete the copy that is there, and you do not know if that was already copied to another
Correct.
server. So what you're describing doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah, but
If
you're saying
I
hackback has to have something tangible coming back.
no,
It
it,
could
I'm
just be
saying,
they just
I'm
breaking into
saying,
someone else's infrastructure is the hackback.
but for what? Like, I'm saying that when you talk about hackback, you're describing that as if that is a different dynamic than just a hack, right? Like,
Okay, fair.
like, a hack is a hack is a hack. A hack is it as objectionable as possible? Whatever. I don't know. The objectionable part of it tends to be in U.S. law. The fucking CFAA was written in like 1994. And it problematizes me using any credentials that I'm not authorized to use. If I find some email creds somebody left somewhere and just go check that mailbox, I have broken the CFAA. So like,
Even if I read the New York Times with someone else's password,
not that you would ever
do that.
do that, but that is a violation of CFAA. That is how unnuanced and unsophisticated that law is. So like, are we talking about morals? Are we talking about diplomacy? Or are we talking about criminality? And criminality is subject to regions and jurisdictions and whatnot. Look, I don't usually agree with JD over Rob Joyce, largely because I'm not smart enough to understand JD's tweets. They're very like difficult to
The most
penetrate.
obscure things. He asked me a question and I couldn't even figure out what the
I
question was.
love JD. I think he's a super smart dude. We used to do Glass House together, but like it is hard for me
For
to
the
know.
audience, we're talking about JD Work, who is
I mean, JD Work, who just finished his PhD and does things, and I won't represent him because I don't know how he represents himself these days.
fair.
But yeah, he was, I believe,
He does
at one of
things.
he was
He
at one of the
does
war
things.
colleges.
Mhm.
But JD's great, and in this particular case, I was surprised because I found myself agreeing more with JD as far as I understood what the case was here. Though I always get the sense with JD and with Rob in this case that they're talking about an argument that is happening somewhere we don't see. And that's
Right.
usually the case. Like, that's the thing with JD's tweets. He's usually subtweeting something from a room that we're not allowed in. So it's just like, it's just a different kind of conversation. But my point here is, I don't give a fuck what the US government people have to deal with in closed rooms and how uncomfortable those conversations are. That is not my problem. It is not our problem.
You're
It's
causing
not,
this problem for them, though.
oh no, they're causing all kinds of problems for me. They cause all sorts of fucking problems for us. They cause the CFAA is a problem that we deal with every day that may not have been their doing, but that is their responsibility.
Costin, I
If
asked you
you
15 minutes ago.
if
I
you
asked
get
you 15 minutes ago to put a bow on this story, and you set that man off.
2-hour episode.
if you get deported on Wednesday, you're welcome to Romania.
Oh, thank you. I actually like Romania. It's cool.
Quick. We just had Paul Chester's attention. Paul, if you're still listening, shout out to this. Shout out to the NCSC for this pygmy goat report. Very strong technical report describing the backdoor in Sophos appliances and making the argument that while it was
Which of the backdoors? Which implant?
That's the thing I was going to say. Amazing report, but I couldn't tell at first read, I couldn't tell if they were describing Sophos' implant.
I assumed it was Sophos because they were calling them the goat. Like they're
pygmy, pygmy.
They're fucking goat. They went
Yeah,
out.
the greatest of all time. While we have Paul's attention, Costin, you had some questions.
Go Chich.
I have no questions. I have demands.
Okay.
Can we demand the samples? So whenever government
Mhm.
agencies publish their reports, can we please ask them to upload these samples to VirusTotal or anywhere so that other
Malshare.
people can also play with them? Yes,
What's the
Malshare,
difference?
VirusTotal.
Just quickly for folks in the audience
Mm,
who are not totally plugged into your world. What's the difference between a sample, a Yara rule, an
mm,
IOC, and
mm,
why is the sample the key thing that keeps getting
mm.
withheld once? And what's the difference? Why is that the big difference in your research?
Well, mostly because security companies, we can use the Yara rules for hunting, but if we want to build detection in our products for that thing, the sample is the best. I mean, you can try to use some of the strings from the Yara rule, but it will never be the same as having the sample and writing rules in whatever, let's say, internal detection language you use for your engine or behavior engine or so on. To catch that specific sample. That's why you need it, essentially.
Let's
Juanito, why
let
do you guys hold on to the samples and never want to release it? Why do your government friends hold this? Where is your TLP red
Why do
report?
I work at the fucking government? I want them to share the samples as much as anybody
Why?
else.
Why withhold it? Is there a risk of
But
releasing
so
samples? Help me understand.
I'm actually glad this has come up somehow because I had this conversation with with some government reps this week. And God, I'm not gonna name the org, but let me just make it abundantly clear that you have no reason to celebrate putting a skiff in a collaboration building because now I have no fucking intention of going back to your collaboration building, and neither do any of my friends. I hope you understand that.
You talking
Anyway,
to someone privately, dear.
I
That's like
know.
some
You know
inside
who you
baseball shit.
are. You know who you are. Get your shit together. Anyways, we were having a
Caesar?
conversation about this. We were having a conversation about this, and uh, they're like, "Oh, so you actually want the samples?" I'm like, How is this not self-evident?" But they're the third organization I've had to have this conversation with. So let's make this abundantly clear. We are better at knowing how to hunt for things. I don't want you to sit there and play this shadow puppet game with me where you tell me what the thing looks like to you. I want
This
you to
is what Chich's report is.
just show me the fucking thing and I will go and find it better. And if we want an example, you wanted a bow on this, right? Rob Joyce was seemingly upset in public that we were all writing memes and making jokes about Drovorub.
Yes.
We joked about Drovorub a lot. Why? Because NSA put out a report, they told us how important it was, and no one in the entire industry that I know of, and nobody they know of, ever found Drovorub. Does that mean it doesn't exist? No. But you have the samples. Why don't you just fucking share them? And
Why don't they share them? What's their retort? Help me understand what's holding them up. Is it state secret?
no.
Is it tradecraft? Are you tipping off the adversary? What is the holdup?
I'm gonna describe. I don't know what the holdup is, so I'm gonna describe a series of possibilities that may make someone think they can't share it, because I don't think any of them are valid. But let's go through this, right? In some situations, not necessarily gov, NDAs actually get in the way. So, for example, when you have an incident response engagement, Mandiant is bound by their NDA to the victim. And if the victim is not an enlightened customer, chances are they just don't want to share anything about the incident that happened to them. A. B. With the government, and with other, with governments and with other victims, and let's say customers from endpoint companies, something that happens is, let's say that the malware includes some kind of information about the victim. For example, hard coded credentials about the specific environment that is getting hit. Something that it is very not kosher throughout the industry and gov is doxing the victim. Whether you like it or not, unless that institution says we would like to come out and state that we were hacked, this is like a usually an inviolable red line. It also
Artifacts in the sample give up that information?
sometimes, not like almost most of the time, no, but sometimes. For example, Olympic Destroyer would roll into a victim machine trying to use it would steal creds, and then it would bake them into the next sample that was being infected. It was a file infector. So you could grab it and you would see the like Olympic credentials in the sample. So you knew who the victim was. Now, you can just wipe out those bytes. Just remove them. I'm not telling you that you can't modify the sample. I would rather see the original one, but I'm okay seeing a slightly modified one if it means that I can still write detections and do some hunting. Like,
So there is some middle ground to mitigate some of that risk.
absolutely. I'm not telling you that, like, look, this is not a court case. I don't need you to show me forensic evidence that this is the exact perfect byte by byte thing that you got. I just need to work on what this thing looks like, being able to analyze it and so on. Kostin and I, who can actually write Yara rules that run, are also able to do other types of analysis on these things that might not be readily available or public. And then, look, the final bit is there's a reason that I tend to do call to action to lawyers who are more well versed in cyber. It- most most of these contracts and most of the lawyers involved in these things don't actually understand what we're talking about. They have never seen a sample like this. They don't know what's in it. They tend to treat malware as if it's a proprietary or intellectual property thing that they are holding on to, which makes no fucking sense. Someone else wrote this, someone else compiled it, someone else sent it to you, and then they used it you know, to make you a victim of some sort. When people get shot, there's no intellectual property dispute about the
The
blueprint
bullet casing.
spec and the whatever of the gun that shot you or the bullet in your body. You don't necessarily own the bullet, right? The law enforcement can go get that bullet out of your body for the sake of their investigation. Why the fuck do we treat malware like we own it?
Costin, why do we? And you, are you, when I say you, the collective threat research folks, because it's not just from governments. There's a lot of antivirus companies, anti-malware guys publish reports without samples. We've seen this constant ask, hey, no samples, no samples, no samples. It's not only on the government side where they're afraid of exposing those risks. There's a lot of competitiveness to it. Let's admit the truth here. It's a lot of you guys withhold samples from each other out of just you're competing with each other. You don't want to give up your visibility. Like, is there a middle ground where you're not having to ask Paul Chichester for samples?
I hope there is, and more people do share samples. Actually, I built a project for this specific problem, which has been bugging me for many, many years, which was that some company would just come out, release an amazing report, like, look at this fantastic, super awesome malware that we discovered. But sorry, you can't have the sample, but here's some hashes, just in case by some miracle you're gonna find the sample in your collection, which is unlikely because this sample is so unique that nobody else has it but us. So I built this project called is now on VT. The X handle is now _on _VT, which monitors these hashes that are not on VT and
Are we gonna
lets
not
everybody
talk about
know.
VT again?
Oh
No,
yeah,
we're not
but we
allowed.
love VT. We love VT.
We love you.
Uh, very sad to say that my project now on VT is working at reduced capacity because my account expired, so it can now only look up 500 hashes per day. But I'm in touch with the right people, so I hope it comes back to life very soon. But nevertheless, this happens a lot of times. So if people would share more samples, I think the world would be safer. Like, that's the best argument. Samples make the world safer.
And that's our ask of the NCSC and these guys is please for the sample, right? There are 3 Yara rules there. No, I'm talking about this pygmy goat thing. We've seen some Yara rules. Do they work? Is it
I have
quality
them
rule?
running everywhere. I hope they are. I hope they are in the sense that some of them, they do say that these rules, we've tested them on VT and they have 0 false positives. So they do say that. As far as I can tell, there's 0 hits for the 2 pygmy goat rules, and there's a bunch of hits for the 3rd rule, which is a bit more generic. So So there's that. But I just wanted to mention, like, the good old Cybercom in the days when they were releasing these advisories and post. Do you remember when they were posting the
Yes, yes,
samples to
CENTCOM, the Twitter account, the
CENTCOM?
CENTCOM Twitter account. Yeah.
That was amazing. Please bring that back if possible.
All right. We got a million other stories to get to, but we are at an hour and a half, and I'm going to close this episode against.
No, we said 2 hours,
So-
man. It can't be the Sophos only episode.
I feel like that deserved everything, though. I feel like we'll
Really?
dilute the rest of it.
CIA, Venezuela, Mossad, Vatican.
All right, let's do CIA
Really?
Venezuela. The Wired had an article on in 2019, the Trump administration ordering the CIA, who was reluctant to do it, to overthrow the Venezuelan Maduro. Among other actions, CIA conducted a cyber attack to sabotage the digital payment system used by the Venezuelan military. If the CIA does it and it's called an implant, is it malware and is it a cyber attack? One, and does this surprise you at all? Isn't this the work of what these guys do?
Yeah, right. Like, well,
Do we have eyes on the CIA from a threat intel perspective? Do they have a typhoon name, or do they have a eagle name? Like, what's the common thing?
who are we asking, right? Like, if you ask OpenAI, they have a name, and or
Help the audience. Is there a public name?
What
I won't
Symantec calls
close
them
to-
Longhorn, right?
Longhorn by Symantec, the Lambert's constellation back in the Kaspersky days. Their Red Drip team had a different name for them, which I cannot
What
remember.
does Chihu call them? I'm just
It
kidding.
was APT C something or other.
C61.
C61.
So this is the work of the Lamberts. This would be the
Well-
work of the Lamberts.
In theory, maybe, but like, so look, I'm only hedging my bets in here in the sense that since we don't know what the cyber attack looks like,
No IOCs, no samples, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a scoop, right? And so we just don't know. Like, I mean, there's got to be other.
Reliable story, though. This is a Zach Dorfman story, who is traditionally reliable reporting, right? Yeah.
Well, I think it's much more I think it's much more interesting to discuss a lot of the institutional stuff around this. Like, I personally laughed my ass off when I read that, like, the CIA was asked to do this in Venezuela and they had to scramble because they hadn't been bothering with Venezuela for how long?
It's a
If you
failed
pay-
state, right?
But if you pay attention to Venezuelan politics over the past 25 years, they blame the CIA for fucking everything. Like if the water doesn't come out of the faucet on a random Tuesday, the CIA is fucking with your plumbing. And the CIA is sitting there like, oh, we haven't paid attention to this fucking shithole in ages. Like, we need to figure out how to do this.
Don't call Venezuela a shithole.
I'm sorry. Venezuela is now a shithole. Venezuela was the most developed nation in South America when I was growing up.
No, I'm from Guyana. It's my neighbors.
And they were made that way by rampant corruption and like complete lack of care. So I think
Fair.
you got to call it what it is, right? It's a humanitarian crisis, if you want to call
But
it
can
right.
cyber fix it? Can cyber fix it?
Just a little bit of cyber can go a long way.
So the idea here, this was kind of like a disruption activity here. They were hacking into this payroll system to stop Maduro from paying soldiers or paying his people on time, just to kind of cause some friction and chaos in their legitimate use case for government to government, nation state type thing, right, Costin?
Absolutely. The one thing I don't understand here, I think would be interesting to understand why was it reluctant? Why reluctant to overthrow Maduro? Like, this is the part that I don't get.
Oh, I think it's actually more of an obvious one, especially when you see that Gina Haspel basically said, "Call me into the Oval Office and tell me that I have to do this." The CIA, to this day, is constantly bashed for having
Everything.
for everything, but also for having like had too heavy a hand in trying to be interventionist in Latin America in the
For good reason, though.
Sure.
This is a sore subject on this podcast because
This is
I
a sore
get
subject
incoming
on this
flack from
podcast.
my friends in Argentina about us kind of like dismissing.
I look, I don't have a problem saying that the CIA had a heavy hand in Latin America. I have a problem when we say that it was the only one that did. It's a one-handed handshake. The KGB had 5 times as many people in Latin America at the time. So like, my problem is not in putting any kind of blame on the CIA. It's just a really stupid looking movie if you think that there were only like one set of characters fighting against no one, right? That's the ultra silliness of all of the discussions in South America, which I am all too familiar. You get all these like ultra left bitching about the CIA with good reason, but it very conveniently ignores the sheer deployment of KGB officers and how much very heavy-handedly they were involved in Latin America at the same time.
Right, the extension of the Cold War there was clearly visible.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
on both sides.
What the fuck are we arguing about?
The article also alleged that Colombia conducted an operation to sabotage Venezuelan Su-30 jets. There's a lot of action happening there next to my little Guyana. Costin, sum up this story quickly. I mean, it's obviously a hot headline because it's the CIA, the reluctance, Maduro, all the geopolitical implications. But this is the type of cyber attack that is fairly normal in that world, right?
I would say that this is a kind of cyber attacks that people expect intelligence agencies to do, like in Venezuela, I don't know, Iran, North Korea, and so on and so on. Perhaps at the moment it's more important to do these kind of things in the Middle East, in Iran. So you could say that refocusing the efforts from there to another country, that's maybe why someone might be reluctant. There are more important things going on, like at this very moment. Of course, back in 2019, it was maybe a different situation. But just to sum up, I think would be most welcome to see more stories like this. Remember, I am all for reading success stories. We need more success stories.
Good point.
There's a lot of abuses. Like abusing, spying on politicians behind their back. But like,
this is
where
a success
are all
story
the
in
good
your
stories?
mind, right? Like this should have been a press release.
This is the success story, yeah.
What about the scandal in Italy? Is that a success story as well? I want to set this one up as bizarro because it includes the Mossad, the Vatican.
What the fuck is going on?
Italian politicians and some private hacking company. Costin, you set this up because I can't wrap my head around the enormity and the complicatedness of it.
Hope this gets turned into a movie, because like it's mind-blowing what's been happening here. And I mean, going back to Juan writing this book about hacking team with Lorenzo, I think historically there's been so many things happening in Italy. There's also the pyramid case that we investigated a couple of years ago, the Occhioneri brothers. Again, people essentially hacking, doing all this hacking, collection, spying on politicians, on European Union politicians and officials, just to blackmail them, to leverage information and so on. Super hot. In this case, in this particular case, it's everything that we expected and maybe a bit more. This company called Equalize apparently was involved in a number of hacks of politicians between 2019 and 2024, including members of the current prime minister's party. Now the police claims that they've seized this CNC in Lithuania. I think it would be amazing to just get the IP address of that. Can we find the malware? Because here it seems they developed a custom malware they were using for this cyber espionage operations. So if we could somehow, in the same as it was for the pyramid case, where the malware could actually be discovered by writing Yara rules for things like keywords in the indictment from the Italian police. Apparently, in this case, this document has 518 pages, as seen by Politico. So there's like a lot of information in there. But here, I think for me the craziest story is that the company was hired to spy on Prigozhin and the infamous Wagner group in Russia. And that information that they were allegedly stealing was supposed to be made available to the Vatican.
Wait, connect those things for me. Connect Prigozhin, the Mossad, the Vatican, and a company called Equalize spying on Italian politicians.
I can't. I mean, maybe... these kind of things can only happen in Europe.
There's a great line in the story, by the way. The Pope could not be reached for comment.
we put that at the end of all stories just for random. Yeah. The
But
look,
Juan, did you look at this thing?
I looked at it, but I don't understand it any better than you guys. The only thing that makes it just a tiny bit less bizarre is just a vague familiarity with how much the Vatican has been in the past involved with like a lot of different types of like conventional espionage. I mean, you're talking about a global organization with a strong like ethical bent that has a network of human sources literally deployed across the world that can
Diplomacy,
legitimately have
bro.
conversations with people. Yeah. Um, so in that sense, I'm not super surprised, but it doesn't completely shock me. However, I don't
The
understand.
Mossad, you understand. I mean, if you're an intelligence agency, you want access to whatever Equalize has on
Yeah.
politicians. I mean, that's what you trade in, right? That's your normal trade craft. I
But
get that. The Wagner thing, I get. You're tracking a
well,
war criminal.
mm,
I would understand it if it's like these are three topics that involve equalize. The part that I don't understand, if I'm reading this article right, which I don't know, like, was the Prigozhin information supposed to go through the Vatican for the Mossad? Like, am I misunderstand? Like, I feel like this is different equalize customers or operations getting rolled into one, and that would make more sense if it's like, oh, equalize was dealing with the Wagner case. They were also um, providing they were also working for the Mossad in a different thing, and they were also somehow involved with the Vatican on a different thing, then it's just a story about equalize. And then that would
Right.
make sense. It's the part where all this gets smushed together and you go, what the fuck does the Vatican care about Prigozhin and why is the Mossad? And you're like, okay, this doesn't make
Is
sense.
it possible it could be terrible reporting, or we trust these
mm.
political people to be representing it properly based on this database?
I'm not saying terrible reporting. I wonder with things like this, of course, the sourcing is going to be hard, and you're lucky to get people who are willing to go on the record and give you stuff. So I could just see things getting maybe a little more cobbled together than they then might be appropriate. That's
You get the
Well,
last word, Costin.
I mean, I tried looking a bit at Equalizer's website, which unfortunately is dead at the moment. But they do have this website. I think it was eqlz.io, and
Is the
it looks
Wayback Machine up yet?
there should be, yeah. So you
Interesting.
can actually find the. I was looking like at the IP history, things like that, trying to see a bit. But it looked to me that this is but one of these many kind of business intelligence companies that have been popping up like mushrooms for the many last years. And maybe I think the most famous case would be Wild Neutron. I mean, being one of these companies, but
Still an unsolved case, right? There's still a mysterious actor.
and suspected to be connected to one of these business intelligence companies. But it feels that there's probably a lot more, like companies like Black Cube, right? I think there were a few others that maybe should not be named, but I think that this is a very, very interesting field, and very little is known about these business intelligence companies who
That's what
actually
we're calling them
leverage.
now? Business intelligence
They,
what they
companies? Is
call
NSO going to rebrand? Is
um,
NSO going to rebrand
can
as the
I
business
can I call
intelligence
them
leaders?
can I call them
different.
like a enhanced business telemetry collection or something like this? I, I I would say, listen, in this story, like the last point in this story is that the only thing which is missing is Romania being connected to it
Oh,
somehow.
yeah.
Oh
There's
wait,
going to
it
be a
is.
server there somewhere.
Is it?
It is connected. Like
How?
apparently a member of the Romanian parliament, he was in the parliament, uh, turned out to be a spy for the Mossad and was somehow connecting. He's now on the run and he's asking for asylum and connecting all the whole story. So there you go. Romania is somehow
Wow.
There's
involved
always
as
a
well.
Romanian. There's always a
So
Romanian.
involved somehow.
I'm going to close it by adding a new story into it as well, because we're not yet at the 2 hour mark, and now I'm fucking fighting for it.
There you go.
Canada actually put out their annual report, the Canadian government, our friends up in Canada. And one of the fascinating things that jumped out at me is them proactively saying, hey, we're bracing for some attacks from the Indian nations, from India, nation state type attacks from India, because we've been having this diplomatic back and forth over some issues in Canada, and that diplomatic relationship broke down. And the expectation is India is going to respond by hacking, and it's against these Sikhs and some of the separatism and some of the internal India politics. Kostin, are you? I mean, what do you make of this? Is it surprising to you that the government says, "Listen, that government is going to be soon prominently attacking us"?
It, it's interesting to me. Why this is interesting is because it kind of says that well, because of what's been happening, and it's not our fault necessarily, but because of what's been happening, you probably will be the targets of whatever nation country's espionage efforts. I think historically Canada has been in this position for many things. Remember, I think they were in a similar position with Saudi Arabia when they got into some kind of problems because offering asylum to people who were fleeing that. And I think over the years they've been in this position for a number of times. And to me, that now it's switching to India, well, not entirely surprising. I think the Citizen Lab, being based in Canada, right, the University of Toronto, they've made a lot of their research based on clues and hints and working with people based in Canada who have been the targets of
And these are
such
usually
cyber attacks.
activists and political types and
Correct.
like people who escape persecution, that
Refugees,
type. Yes, refugees, exactly.
asylum seekers, right? But the high profile kind that attract a lot of interesting attacks. So it would be, in my opinion, I think India is extremely capable in the sense that they've been diversifying the operations, always restructuring groups whenever they get caught.
You're talking about India as a nation state threat
as
actor.
APTs, right. And restructuring a lot of private domain activity. Of course, we talked about it in the previous episode, but there's a lot of other this kind of business enhanced telemetry collection companies from India over the years that have never been publicly outed, actually. So there's quite a few of them. And I'm not entirely surprised that this is happening, and it would be very interesting to see if Citizen Lab can discover some new implants, I don't know, for iOS, for whatever, sophisticated stuff, hopefully.
Is it standard to expect that as soon as bilateral relationships start to deteriorate a little bit, you should start bracing for incoming? Juan, is that a normal part of diplomacy now?
It's always been a normal part of what happens. It is not usually something that's telegraphed to other people.
Well, what's the reason for them to say, hey, we know that this is going to be coming down the pike?
I really don't know. I don't know because
Is this shields up?
I mean, well,
Right?
maybe, right? Like it does feel kind of shields up, unless like it's the fact that it's coming from the Canadians, where I'm like, do they normally do this? Has this happened before? I don't know.
They're the nicest people in the world. Like they're so nice about it too. They say we judge that official bilateral relations between Canada and India will very likely drive Indian state-sponsored cyber activity against Canada. Eh?
Eh? I mean, look, it usually it's almost certain that this would happen, right? Like especially with certain states, but in particularly China, India, etc., where it's like, when you are involved in these negotiations, they're going to try to find some kind of leverage and information. It's like always happened. The only thing that's interesting about this is the fact that they're telegraphing it this way and why. And
We've been pretty harsh on China tracking Uyghurs and doing Uyghur attacks against Uyghurs. The Indians here specifically are agitating for this the Sikh folks, which means it's again, Costin, we've talked about it, nation state type attacks and what's off limits and what should be off limits.
Is the difference here that the Indians got caught staging an assassination in Canada recently, and like, is it more that like there's a certain deterioration of the perceived sovereign respect of
Right, the
Canadian
brazenness of,
soil,
yeah.
or like they're trying to telegraph more about what's happening with Indian intelligence, because otherwise, like, this is kind of like a far cry for help of well, we really would love it if they didn't succeed in their attempts to spy as we negotiate. And you go, Okay,
But these
weird.
folks are not only in Canada. I expect these folks are all over the world. Do we anticipate, like, how do we view India as a threat actor in that space? Not necessarily doing economic espionage or whatever
You're
they do
referring
for
to like
national intelligence.
you
Say
you mean
again?
leaks or like
Yes. I mean this kind of tracking of dissident activity.
oh, I mean
I remind you that this is what held up Sweden's entry into NATO because the Turks were not happy about them harboring these kinds of folks. So this is always a sensitive, big geopolitical topic. Do we know for sure that the Indians are aggressively tracking and targeting Sikhs around the world? Why we've never seen a piece of malware like we've seen with the Uyghur type malware? Or should we? Are the Canadians basically telling us, "Hey, start digging and start looking for these people"?
well, it's not just the Sikhs, right? Like what you're seeing when it comes to India and sort of the general geopolitical alignment towards India is increasing levels of concern because of Narendra Modi's rule and how much that seems to be putting what keeps being described as the world's largest democracy into a sort of state of peril, right? Like there's this notion that this nation's being ruled by your kind of Netanyahu Trump type of leader that doesn't have a lot of respect for the rule of law, is pushing the nation towards being more nationalistic, is willing to leverage both economic, cyber, etc. measures against their perceived enemies. So you just kind of look at it with a sense of dread and concern. And in that capacity, we have seen them do all kinds of not very cool things for
Don't see
the.
a lot of APT reports on India though. They're not in the top
Well, you,
5, 10 of anyone's.
I mean, you see them a lot, right? Like you see, your sidewinders, modified elephant, all the stuff that we just saw with.
Peter, yeah.
Yeah, bitter is interesting. And there's tons of elephants, right? Like you're dropping elephants and all this other stuff. But
All
Patchwork.
these are for the audience because you guys talk like the audience knows what you're talking about. All of these are code names for APT reports that have been published in the past, right?
yeah, I mean, there's tons of activity on India. And then there's so I think something worth distinguishing, right? Like there's the nation state side of Indian cyber, where Sidewinder and Bitter are probably the more interesting groups to pay attention to. Then there's the hack for hire side of Indian cyber, which is concerning in a different way, because we call it hack for hire, and I think that's a euphemistic. That's sort of it's the same thing as business intelligence. It's just we give business intelligence companies in Western Europe for some reason we give them a little bit more
Implant,
credit.
malware,
Yeah,
mercenary.
well, in
It's
this
all
case,
words, man.
they're also hackers for hire. They're just white, but there's the same distinction, right? It's like what we were drawing when we were having the conversations about like Appen and Beltrox and so on. It's like there's a difference between a lawful surveillance capability provider like Hacking Team or NSO, where they're giving the tool to somebody and that person may use it for good, evil, whatever. Then there's the company you call up and say, I need information on X, and they run a whole operation and break the law themselves, and they do whatever the fuck they want, and then they provide you with the output with a certain amount of plausible deniability as to like how you got it.
Normal operating procedure that happens all the time, right?
Well, normal operating procedure for hack for hire companies. That's the difference that we're drawing between, and that's what we used to call mercenary groups, right? Like this is the first time I think I've heard Kostin talk about Wild Neutron, referring to them as a business intelligence org, because I'm used to us describing them as a mercenary group. But that's where you start to see sort of the sliding scale of the same terminology with or without euphemisms in the middle.
Right. And while Neutron was the one targeting Apple developers, we believe they were the guys responsible for breaking into Microsoft's
Microsoft, Twitter, Flash,
Facebook.
0 days, two different interesting campaigns, no attribution, and a lot of false flaggy type stuff peppered in between.
And Romanian keywords in the malware.
La revedere, which is a good appropriate way to close the pod.
You guys have great memories. All right, we'll close the pod by reminding folks next week, by the time you hear from us, the US should have a new president. if they take a
What do you
week
mean
to
by
announce
new?
it.
Or the
Well, it's
same?
going to be a new president anyway. There are two new people running completely.
Or the same president?
No. The current president is not running.
Depends on who's running the country. I mean, like,
And with that, thank you guys very much. We didn't make it to 2 hours, thankfully. So we have something to aim for moving forward as our importance and influence increases or wanes,
Or
depending on
wanes.
how
I believe
things
it
go.
wanes. Still no awards.
Thanks, guys. We'll catch up next week.
Thank you.
la rivedere.